Have you ever poured your heart and soul into making your home a haven, a place of peace and safety, only to have it threatened by something as mundane as a homeowners association? What would you do if your peaceful slice of heaven was threatened by folks more concerned with uniform hedges than your family's safety? Stick around, because my story, the one that turned our quiet Silverwood Lane into a battleground, might just make you reevaluate everything you thought you knew about community living. Alright, folks. Let me tell you a story. It's not one of those happily ever after tales from the get-go, but it certainly has a powerful ending, one that changed our entire neighborhood, Silverwood Lane, for the better. And believe me, we earned that better. Imagine this, the roar of a bulldozer, a sound so jarring it felt like an earthquake, as it ripped into my beloved rain garden, a sanctuary I'd painstakingly built with my own two hands. I stood there, watching, heart in my throat, while two HOA board members, Mona Jenkins and her perpetually nodding sidekick, Bartholomew Bart Finch, stood by, smiling. Smiling, mind you, completely unaware of the disaster they were not just causing, but actively orchestrating. You might be wondering, Ellie, how on earth did it get to this point? Well, let me take you back to a time when my biggest worry was which shade of petunia to plant. It all started a little over 10 years ago when my husband, Arthur, bless his practical, sensible heart, he's the kind of man who could fix anything with a roll of duct tape and a thoughtful frown, and I bought our dream home on Silverwood Lane. We were empty nesters, looking for a peaceful retreat after raising 3 rambunctious boys and navigating busy careers. Nestled on a steep hill, it was exactly what we'd been looking for: a quiet street, mature trees, a sense of community where neighbors actually waved, and that classic American charm you see in old movies. For folks like us, who've seen a few decades roll by, stability and tradition are precious things. We wanted a place where we could plant roots, enjoy our golden years, maybe tend a garden, and certainly spoil our grandkids rotten when they visited. This slice of nature, with its charming quirks and its beautiful, albeit sloped, backyard, felt like a perfect fit. It felt safe. Little did I know, this peaceful haven would soon become a battleground for my peace of mind, the safety of my home, and ultimately, the well-being of my entire neighborhood. Stay tuned to find out how this affects not just my home, but every single house on Silverwood Lane. Now, if you're like me, you value an orderly living space. You want your home to be safe, well-maintained, and yes, beautiful. You take pride in your property. But beautiful means different things to different people, especially when you throw an HOA into the mix, particularly one that seems to interpret order as absolute, unthinking uniformity. Our property, being on a hill, came with a unique challenge: drainage. Every time a heavy rainstorm rolled through, water would rush down, creating little rivulets that carved paths through the garden beds, eroding precious topsoil, and threatening to compromise the integrity of our foundation. It wasn't just an aesthetic issue, it was a potential structural hazard. Arthur, being the pragmatist he was, immediately started researching solutions. We didn't want a quick fix, like simply diverting the water into the neighbor's yard. That's just kicking the can down the road, isn't it? We wanted something sustainable, something that worked with nature, not against it. That's when we discovered the concept of a rain garden. A rain garden, for those who might not know, isn't just a pretty flower bed. It's a strategically designed, shallow depression planted with native vegetation that's incredibly thirsty. It's engineered to absorb stormwater runoff, slowing down the rush of water, allowing it to soak into the ground rather than gushing downhill. It filters pollutants, replenishes groundwater, and most importantly for us, prevents erosion. It's brilliant, really. Environmentally responsible, aesthetically pleasing in its own natural way, and incredibly practical. It seemed like the perfect solution. We spent weeks, months even, poring over diagrams, consulting with local landscape engineers, choosing the right native plants that would thrive in our soil and climate, and planning every detail down to the last river stone. We wanted to do it right, with proper permits and professional consultation. We even had a geological survey done to ensure maximum effectiveness and to prove its necessity for hillside properties. We truly believed we were doing our part, not just for our home, but for the community's safety too. We sent our detailed plans to the Silverwood Lane Homeowners Association, a requirement, of course. The HOA documents, thicker than a dictionary, stipulated that any exterior changes had to be approved by the Architectural Review Committee. We expected a bit of bureaucratic red tape, maybe a few questions about plant selection or water flow. What we got instead was a terse, 2-sentence letter, typed on letterhead that probably cost more than the annual budget for actual landscaping, informing us that our proposed landscaping changes were not in keeping with the aesthetic uniformity of the community. Aesthetic uniformity? We were talking about preventing a potential landslide that could take out half the street. It was almost comical, the sheer absurdity of it, if it wasn't so genuinely frustrating. My first thought was, are they serious? Do they even read these plans? Honestly, if it were me, thinking about it now, I don't know how anyone could prioritize a perfectly trimmed shrub over the structural integrity of homes and the safety of their neighbors. But that, my friends, was Mona Jenkins, the undisputed, self-appointed reigning queen of the Silverwood Lane HOA. Mona was a stickler for rules. Not necessarily sensible rules, mind you, but rules. Her front yard was a testament to geometric precision, every hedge clipped to within an inch of its life, every flower bed a symmetrical kaleidoscope of colors, practically bleeding perfection. She saw our rain garden, with its diverse native plants and natural flow, as an affront to her vision of suburban perfection. It was too wild, too natural, too unpredictable. In her world, if it didn't fit a perfect square or a neat circle, it was an aberration. We tried to reason with them. Arthur, with his calm, logical approach, spent hours preparing. He even offered to give a presentation to the board, using diagrams and scientific data, explaining the intricacies of erosion control and the long-term benefits of a rain garden for the entire community. We had studies, data, expert opinions from certified engineers. But trying to explain hydrology to Mona was like trying to teach a cat to play the piano. Utterly pointless, and you just end up with a lot of frustrated meows and a scratched piano. "Mr. Henderson," she'd said, her voice as clipped as her hydrangeas, during a particularly tense board meeting, "we appreciate your enthusiasm for natural elements. However, our covenants are quite clear. All external landscaping must be approved by the board, and your design simply doesn't align with the established standards of Silverwood Lane. We maintain a certain level of uniformity to preserve property values and the aesthetic appeal of our community." She emphasized aesthetic, as if it were the holiest of words. Property values. I swear, that woman could turn property values into a four-letter word. It was never about logic, never about safety, always about control and what she considered proper. We got a cease and desist order for the initial digging, then another for the planting, even though we were just laying down the base layers of gravel and filtration fabric. It was a constant battle, a game of bureaucratic whack-a-mole, where every sensible move we made was met with another absurd regulation. We paused construction, hoping cooler heads would prevail, perhaps after a refreshing glass of iced tea on a hot summer day. We submitted modified plans, trying to meet their aesthetic requirements while still maintaining the rain garden's functionality. We even suggested using less wild native plants, ones that looked more conventionally tamed, even if it meant sacrificing a bit of biodiversity. But every single proposal was met with a brick wall of no, reinforced with legal jargon. Their counter-proposal? A single meticulously maintained row of common boxwood hedges, a few feet tall. Boxwood hedges on a steep incline, meant to stop a deluge of rainwater. It was a joke. A very expensive, very dangerous joke. I mean, what were they thinking? Did they imagine the water would just politely go around the hedges? Einddenke de ultimatum. Not a friendly suggestion, not a polite request, but a cold, official letter. Remove the unapproved landscaping within 72 hours, the letter stated, in bold, underlined type, or face severe fines and professional removal at your expense, with additional penalties for noncompliance. Professional removal. That's where the bulldozer comes in. I remember standing at my kitchen window that Tuesday morning, sipping my coffee, trying to mentally prepare myself for another day of arguing with HOA drones over the phone. And then I heard it. That low rumble, growing louder and louder, vibrating through the very floorboards. My heart leaped into my throat. It was a bulldozer. A freaking bulldozer, rumbling down Silverwood Lane, heading straight for my house. I rushed outside, my bathrobe flapping around me, shouting, "Stop! What are you doing?" Mona and Bart were already there, supervising. Mona, in her impeccably tailored pantsuit that looked fresh out of a dry cleaner, gave me a tight, triumphant smile. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, her voice dripping with forced politeness, "you were informed. We gave you ample opportunity to comply. The board has authorized the removal of your unapproved installation.
Unapproved installation.
I practically shrieked, my voice cracking. It's a rain garden. It's here to protect my home. To protect the neighborhood from erosion. Didn't you read the reports? Bart, ever the coward, just shifted his weight nervously and looked at his expensive loafers. He couldn't meet my eye. Mona, however, squared her shoulders, a steely glint in her eye. It is a violation of our covenants, Mrs. Henderson. Furthermore, it is unsightly and detracts from the overall pristine appearance of Silverwood Lane. The board's decision is final, and frankly, your continued resistance has been quite disruptive. I watched, tears streaming down my face, as the very earth I'd nurtured was torn asunder. The carefully placed rocks, the vibrant native plants, the specially mixed soil designed for maximum absorption, all of it was reduced to a muddy, chaotic mess, a testament to the HOA's sheer arrogance. The machine hummed its destructive song, a symphony of bureaucratic ignorance. It was a gut punch, a personal violation that felt like a wound carved right into my soul. I looked around, hoping for a sign of solidarity from neighbors, but most windows remained discreetly curtained, eyes probably peeking through blinds, too intimidated to challenge the HOA's iron fist. It was clear the HOA had a reputation for being heavy-handed, and most residents, though perhaps sympathetic, were too afraid of the financial penalties or social ostracization to speak up. And honestly, I couldn't blame them. That HOA was a force to be reckoned with, a miniature fiefdom of rule-obsessed tyrants. It was sickening. Over the next few weeks, it rained. And rained. And then it really, really rained. A series of unprecedented thunderstorms rolled in from the Pacific, turning our lovely Silverwood Lane into a slip and slide. The ground, now stripped of its carefully planned erosion control, the very thing designed to hold it together, became saturated. The topsoil, without the rain garden to slow and absorb the water, had nowhere to go but down. And it did.
I remember the night the big one hit.
It was a Tuesday, I think, or maybe a Wednesday. The days blur when you're in the middle of a crisis. It was a torrential downpour, unlike anything we'd seen in years, a truly biblical deluge. Arthur and I were huddled in our living room, listening to the deluge, our hearts pounding with every rumble of thunder.
The wind howled, and the rain lashed against the windows like angry fists.
Suddenly, there was a sickening groan, a sound like a giant beast clearing its throat, followed by a monstrous ripping and crumbling noise. Our entire house shook violently, picture frames rattled off the walls, and a vase on the mantelpiece toppled over with a crash. We rushed to the back window. What we saw chilled us to the bone. Our backyard, once a gentle slope, was now a gaping, raw wound. A massive section of the hillside, hundreds of cubic yards of earth, had given way. It wasn't just mud, it was a river of mud, rocks, uprooted trees, and twisted branches, cascading directly towards the homes below with terrifying speed and force. It wasn't just our property affected. The landslide was immense, powerful, an unstoppable force of nature unleashed by human folly and bureaucratic obstinacy. It was exactly what we had tried to prevent. The next morning was a scene of utter devastation. The air reeked of wet earth and shattered wood. Emergency vehicles lined the street, their flashing lights painting the neighborhood with an eerie glow. Our home, perched precariously at the top, was thankfully spared major structural damage, thanks to Arthur's meticulous foundation work and the grace of God. But further down the slope, it was a different story. Several homes were severely damaged, their foundations cracked, their lower levels filled with mud and debris. And then, the ultimate irony, a twist of fate so poetic it almost felt like divine intervention. Mona Jenkins's meticulously manicured property, just 2 houses down, had taken the brunt of it. Her prize-winning rose bushes were buried under feet of mud, her geometric hedges now just pathetic mounds of dirt. Her beloved sunroom, a place where she'd surely planned many a covenant violation meeting, was partially crushed, its glass shattered. The universe, it seemed, had a wicked, undeniable sense of humor. Arthur looked at me, his eyes filled with a quiet, almost mournful resolve. "Ellie," he said, his voice low, "we warned them. We gave them the solution. This was preventable. All of this, it was preventable." He was right. This wasn't just an act of nature. It was a direct, foreseeable consequence of the HOA's willful negligence and their absurd adherence to aesthetics over basic safety. This wasn't just about our pride, or our garden. This was about accountability. This was about common sense versus stubborn, misguided authority. This was about the safety and financial ruin of our entire community. That's when I decided. This wasn't just about my rain garden anymore. This was bigger. We were going to sue the HOA. It was a terrifying thought, taking on a powerful organization, but it was the only rational and moral thing to do. We had to fight for what was right, not just for us, but for everyone on Silverwood Lane. Finding a lawyer who understood the complexities of HOA law and had a sense of humor was key. We found him in Mr. Frank Goldberg, a seasoned attorney with a twinkle in his eye, a slightly disheveled suit, and a reputation for taking on the little guy against big bureaucratic bullies. He was smart, strategic, and had a delightful dry wit that perfectly suited the absurdity of our situation. He made us feel like we weren't crazy, which, after dealing with the HOA for so long, was a huge relief. "So, Mrs. Henderson," Frank had said during our first meeting, adjusting his spectacles on his nose, "let me get this straight. They bulldozed a perfectly functional, environmentally sound project designed to prevent the very thing that then happened, causing damage to their own property and their neighbors. And they call you the problem. This, my dear, is what we in the legal profession like to call a slam dunk with sprinkles on top. Or, as I like to say, a lawsuit so juicy, it practically sues itself." He gave a hearty chuckle, and for the first time in weeks, I found myself smiling. The discovery process was fascinating, and frankly, infuriating. Frank, with his team of paralegals and investigators, dug deep into the HOA's records. And what they found was a tangled web of negligence, questionable financial decisions, and a shocking lack of due diligence. It turned out, the HOA board, particularly Mona and Bart, had consistently ignored expert reports regarding the soil instability on the hillside. There were geological surveys from years ago that flagged the area as high risk for erosion, and they simply filed them away without taking action. Even worse, they'd approved lucrative contracts with a specific landscaping company, let's just call them Greenbacks and Greed LLC, that charged exorbitant rates for superficial aesthetic work, like planting those uniform boxwood hedges, while conveniently omitting crucial, more expensive erosion control measures. There were strong hints, though harder to prove definitively in court, of kickbacks or sweetheart deals between the HOA board members and this landscaping company. It became devastatingly clear that aesthetic uniformity was less about preserving property values and more about maintaining control, cutting corners on essential maintenance, and perhaps even lining a few pockets at the expense of the community's safety. It was a classic case of corruption hiding behind a veneer of respectability and rules. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak out before now filled the benches, their faces a mixture of curiosity, quiet support, and dawning realization as the evidence unfolded. Mona, perched at the defendant's table like a queen on her throne, looked as though she were attending a fashion show, radiating an air of indignant superiority, as if we were the ones inconveniencing her. Bart, as usual, looked like he wished he were anywhere else, preferably under a very large rock. Frank was brilliant. He brought in geologists who explained, in plain English, the science of our rain garden and how its removal directly contributed to the landslide. He showed photographic evidence, satellite images that clearly depicted the before, with our rain garden, holding the slope, and the after, the bare slope, then the devastation. He cross-examined Mona with a politeness that was almost more devastating than aggression. "Miss Jenkins," Frank asked, his voice calm but pointed, "you stated that the rain garden was removed because it was unsightly. Can you explain how preventing catastrophic erosion, which led to the destruction of several homes, is considered unsightly in the context of community safety?" Mona, flustered, blustered about standards and curb appeal, and maintaining the pristine character of Silverwood Lane. Frank simply let her ramble, allowing her own words to condemn her, then concluded, "So to clarify, Ms. Jenkins, your priority was indeed curb appeal over the warnings from multiple engineering reports and the safety of your neighbors, who pay your salary through their HOA dues?" The silence in the courtroom was deafening. She had no good answer. Her carefully constructed facade began to crack. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the stand, heart pounding, but resolute. I spoke from the heart, recounting the initial joy of finding our dream home, the painstaking effort in designing the rain garden, our genuine desire to protect our property and the environment, and the utter heartbreak of watching it be destroyed by a bulldozer. I spoke of the terror of the landslide, the destruction it wrought on our neighbors' lives, and the quiet fear that had settled over our once peaceful neighborhood. "I believe in orderly living," I told the judge and jury, my voice clear and steady. "I believe in rules. But rules should serve a purpose. They should protect, not endanger. They should foster community, not division." What happened here wasn't about rules. It was about power, a profound lack of common sense, and a complete disregard for the well-being of others. We tried to be good citizens, to work within the system. But when the system is broken, when it prioritizes vanity over safety, sometimes you have to stand up and fight.
The jury deliberated for less than a day.
I remember sitting in the hallway with Arthur, the minutes stretching into hours, each tick of the clock amplifying the anxiety. Then, the bailiff called us back in. My stomach was doing flip-flops. The verdict was clear. The Silverwood Lane Homeowners Association was found liable for the damages caused by the landslide due to their negligence and their arbitrary enforcement of rules over scientific and safety recommendations. They were ordered to cover all damages to the affected homes, including Mona Jenkins's, and to reimburse us for our extensive legal fees and the full cost of rebuilding our rain garden, even better than before. The damages amounted to a staggering sum, a financial hit that the HOA, as it was currently run, could barely absorb. It was a victory, not just for us, but for the entire community. The old HOA board, thoroughly discredited, facing immense financial burden and public outcry, resigned en masse. Mona Jenkins vanished from public life, presumably to find a community that appreciated her particular brand of uniformity. A new board was elected, comprised of reasonable, community-minded individuals who prioritized safety, responsible land management, and transparent governance. They listened to residents, they consulted experts, and they made decisions based on common sense, not just a rulebook. Our little rain garden was rebuilt, even better than before, blooming with even more vibrant native plants, and other neighbors, inspired by our fight, started implementing their own erosion control and sustainable landscaping projects, transforming Silverwood Lane into a truly resilient and beautiful place. Silverwood Lane isn't just uniform anymore. It's resilient, it's responsible, and it's truly beautiful. The struggle was long and arduous, filled with frustration and fear, but the impact? It was profound. It taught us that fighting for what's right, even against seemingly insurmountable odds, can truly change things. It taught us that good intentions, backed by logic and ethics, can triumph over petty power struggles and misguided authority. It taught us that the law, when wielded by those with reason and morality on their side, can be a powerful tool for justice. And perhaps most importantly, it taught us that a true community cares about each other, not just how their lawn looks from the street. So, that's my story, folks. A dramatic roller coaster with a few laughs at the absurdity of it all, some sharp words exchanged, and a whole lot of heart. I hope it made you think a little about the communities we live in and the power we have to shape them. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever battled a stubborn HOA or simply believe in standing up for what's right, please give this video a like. Share it with your friends, family, or anyone you know who's ever had a run-in with an overzealous committee. And most importantly, leave a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in my situation? Or, what's your craziest HOA story?
I de love to hear it.
And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of everyday battles and unexpected triumphs right here on my channel. Until next time, stay safe, stay smart, and keep fighting the good fight.